Thank you for joining us today in this webinar titled Emotions as Data Applying the Hard Skills of Emotional Intelligence for Faculty. We are very honored to have with us today Dr. David Caruso. Dr. David is the co-founder of the Emotional Intelligence Skills Group and research psychologist at the Yale University, where he was also a special assistant to the Dean of the Yale College for 16 years. He received a PhD in psychology from the Case Western Reserve University. He is the co-author of the Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test and has provided feedback to thousands of executives. He and Saluvi wrote the How to Book the Emotional Intelligence Manager. He is a co-author of The Leader's Guide to Solving Challenges with Emotional Intelligence, and he is also a co-author of the Anchors of Emotional Intelligence school-based EI training program. David has published numerous articles on the topics of emotional intelligence and leadership. He has spoken to executives and has trained thousands of professionals around the world, from Brazil to Ireland to China to Saudi Arabia. He has presented to audiences at Lockheed Martin, World Economic Forum, Google, Sberbank, Yale School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, U.S. Coast Guard Academy, American Institute of Chemical Engineers, and U.S. Naval War College. So without any further ado, I would just leave the floor for Dr. David. Dr. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for the honor of inviting me. To be clear, the skills that we're going to go over are very generic. They apply to everything in our life. That's also a challenge in that I'm hoping that as we go through the material, you consider how the skills can be applied in your work. Your roles are very unique. Being a faculty member is not the same as other kinds of roles. And I have also presented many times to faculties around the world as well. So I hope you do find this of value. And give you just 1 second. I just want to, it's disabled. And I'm hoping that you can see my screen.
Yes, it's clear. Thank you.
And the full screen. Great. And thank you for the support earlier to making sure this works. All right. As I mentioned, I hope that you share and apply these skills every day in your work. It's up to you to make that connection. If there's any personal information that should not be shared. If you'd like to ask a question, just unmute, say it. Sometimes I may not see chat, do a hand raise feature, but please stop me at any point in time, ask the question or make the comment. All right. So there are 4 bases for emotional intelligence. Where did this theory come from? And the first is that, this is in the title, it says emotions are data. That means that they send us signals about, especially about relationships. So for instance, if you were walking around campus later today or tomorrow, and you came across this animal in the top row in red, that is a data point. Your ability to read that data accurately could save your life potentially. Think about what information are you getting from that animal in the top. And what is this emotion called? Probably something like aggression. Now that's really, really different. Yeah, exactly. And in chat, someone said angry, another said aggressive, and aggressive and anger are probably, ideal labels for that. Now, let's say you turn the corner and you come across the animal in the lower right in green. What is this data point? What is this animal signaling to you? What would you say? Again, in chat would be great, or unmute, whatever works. Oh, wow. Yeah, so I'm going, oh, wow, because if you're not looking at your chat windows, sympathy, submission, perfect. Yeah, submission is great. Sympathy and looking for sympathy, looking for support. But the key here is that these are very different signals that you're picking up. I sometimes joke with people that wouldn't it be an easier world if we, as faculty members, if our students were more animal-like? So, as opposed to misinterpreting my colleague's remark as aggressive, no, actually, he was just being submissive. But yeah, this is the first basis. Emotions are data. All right, what's the second one? This is interesting to me in that a lot of times when people talk about emotional intelligence, they're saying things like go with your gut feel. It's important to know how you feel. And we do believe that it is important to know how you feel. However, we also say feelings are not always facts, but emotions are data. Now, what we mean by this is that you could have a feeling. Let's say something doesn't feel right, something's off. Now, before you go with your gut feel, we'd say trust your analyzed gut. If it's a mood, manage it away. If it's an emotion, leverage it. I won't go into the details, but many years ago, I was with a group of engineers, and I was trying to explain this concept. And one of the engineers, who happened to also be a fighter jet pilot earlier in his career, said it's signal to noise ratio. Now, I was already anxious and nervous in front of this group of engineers, and he must have picked that up. And he said, yeah, listen, it sounds like when you have a feeling, you want to differentiate the noise. You want to clear up the signal. You want to get rid of the background noise. And whatever remains is the signal as emotions. And I really felt that was a great way of explaining this. So before you act on that gut feel, analyze it. Where's it coming from? For instance, are you just in a bad mood today? Did you not get enough sleep? Were you running late for class? Or did something happen? Was that email really an aggressive email? Was that interaction with a student really that difficult? So I think this is absolutely key. Trust your analyzed gut. All right, third basis for emotional intelligence. Actually, emotions can inform your behavior. I have done this around the world, but sometimes what I'll do is, if I were to do something very strange during our hour together, or yell at you, you would automatically attend to the event. It would change your physiology. You would look up. It would impact your experience and your thoughts. It would ready you for action. What's going on with this? What's happening here? This emotion comes on very quickly, but then you realize, oh, I had dropped something, and when I yelled, it was just due to an unrelated event. You calm down, the emotion dissipates. But it readies you for behavior, it readies you for, well, what if this were live, if I was there with you today? It signals that there's something going on. Now, the option, and what I do actually is, if I were to throw this, ball at you live, you would have a reaction. The option for all of us is as follows: is to be purely logical. So rather than go like this or protect yourself, you might instead want to be logical, sit in your seats in the lecture hall, and kind of compute the trajectory of an object. Now, again, this is meant as a joke, as a way just to share this information. But look, this might take you a couple of seconds, whereas this instant reaction is instant, and it protects you. It gets you ready to flee, to protect yourself, and so forth. All right, the fourth basis for emotional intelligence is also, I think, quite interesting. Again, I think unlike many of us are taught, the neuroscientist Damasio has a wonderful quote. He says, "Far from interfering with rationality, it's the absence of emotion and feeling can break down rationality and make wise decision making almost impossible." So what Damasio is showing, he has some wonderful experiments on this, is that emotion can help us make better decisions. Again, because if emotions are data, if it readies us for adaptive behavior, emotions can help us rather than get in our way if we are intelligent about it. And that is the key, if we are intelligent or smart about that information. So with that as background, 33 years ago, two psychologists, Peter Salovey and John, who goes by Jack Mayer, wrote a little article. They developed a theory. They called it emotional intelligence. They had some data for it, some evidence for it. What happened was a few years later, someone would go to the conferences where they attended. He happened to be a journalist, and he wrote a book. He called it Emotional Intelligence, and that was in 1995. So on the one hand, as researchers, you may be gratified when someone picks up on your work. You're in the newspaper. Doesn't happen a whole lot in our field sometimes. But what happened here is that the pop psychology part of it, they made fantastic claims. It was like, this is the most important thing ever. Many people got into the field and they would say, well, there's intelligence or IQ, and then they would call it EQ. And many people would say it is unrelated to IQ, which, been trained as a researcher, to say that an intelligence is unrelated to other intelligences, it kind of doesn't make sense. So I do want to be careful here with you today, this afternoon, that there are very different approaches to this field. Our approach on the left side of the screen calls this the ability model of emotional intelligence. And it's a set of hard skills. You can objectively measure it, and so forth and so on. So I do want to differentiate our approach. The only downside of our approach is that we can't make fantastic claims, as you'll see later, in fact, just a moment in this presentation. I also want to just note that, as a psychological researcher, we can support our claims. We've got a pretty good history of peer-reviewed articles where we lay out our theory, the measurement of it, and why it's important. The other really gratifying thing, over the years, we would have some other researchers take our work and put it together with this EQ work, and we got some pretty scathing criticism over the decades. But some years ago, a group looked at our work, and on the upper right-hand corner is just the article title that they came out with, looking at our ability model and lending support to it. So I was really, really pleased with that. So again, what you're hearing today, we're applying this theory. We believe we have a pretty good basis for what I'm sharing with you today. So what is emotional intelligence? Over the years, I have my two co-authors and others have joined us, and we sometimes use terms differently. So in the model, as it was revised in 1997, and then we did another article in 2016, 4 related hard skills. It's an intelligence. These are hard skills. How are you feeling? Can you match those emotions to others to connect with them, whether you're students in the classroom, it's in a faculty meeting with other faculty members, or to the task at hand to get work done? What's the meaning of these feelings? How will people change and react? And then, since emotions and feelings are always fluid, how do you move your own feelings and those of others to stay open to these feelings? Maybe to dial down anxiety because it's not appropriate, or maybe you need to inspire or energize others. So 4 related hard skills. So let's try this. If you are willing, it would be helpful if you could go into chat. What is your role? In other words, what do you teach, or what department are you in? And a question you might ask your colleagues just walking down the hallway, how are you this afternoon or today? So for those of you who are able, I know if you're on a phone, it may be more difficult. What department or what do you teach? What is your field? And then can you indicate how are you right now? Which if you would be willing to do that, I would appreciate it. And I will pause just for a few moments here.
Should we send it just to you or just to everyone?
That is up to you. Thank you for that question. It's up to you. It's an excellent question. You could do it just to me, again, for confidentiality, if you're willing to share. And I've just put it in there. Thank you. I just saw something here. Not just in math, but chair of the department. So thank you. Great, great. And how are you? Curious, interesting. Okay. If you haven't, deanship. Great. Curious. Fine and happy. Good. Good. If others could do that, that would be great. And some of you are sending it directly to me. That is fine. Interesting. Okay. I'm saying interesting. Again, given the background of many people here, it's also really helpful and interesting, and what you teach. I see. Interesting. Okay. I see someone is traveling but still here. Okay. Fine. Par for the course. Good. Okay. Okay. Great. Back to interesting. Discombobulated. Wow. Okay. I will not comment on some of your entries. I don't want to embarrass anyone, but there are some interesting things here, and a few that I would not have expected. Good. Yeah. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. It's also good to know who's in the audience. And as all of you know, those of you who teach remotely or have virtual meetings, you're sometimes talking into the void. Who is there? Is there anyone listening and paying attention? So this is really, really helpful. The professor. Terrific. Great. Thank you. All right, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Been nervous and over. So it's interesting. So what is interesting to me is that when I ask this question, I mostly get these things: fine, okay, good, great. It's also very cultural. So in the US, a lot of people, when you're asked, how are you, you'll say, I'm awesome. But typically when people say fine or okay, it's not a great source of data. What I'm intrigued by actually is many of your entries weren't this fine or okay. They were much more specific than that, which I find interesting and unusual in a good way. So the how are you question is pretty powerful, but it's usually kind of not a question. It's typically just a polite greeting. But I'd like you now think about the following, that your daily life is filled with emotions. So saying I'm okay or fine, what does it actually mean? I think we're just being polite, which is terrific. But there are anywhere from the daily stressors of life. What's the weather there today? Do some of you have children? Was it a birthday today or around now, which is a minor stressor, but it's a stressor. Are you teaching a new class this semester, this year, and all that new prep? Did any of you get promoted? All the way to the major, big systemic global issues that we're facing as well. So as someone mentioned in chat, when I say I'm okay, it maybe mean I'm not okay. But we don't know. You may be feeling great. We don't know. So what I do like to think about, and I would like all of you to think about with each other in a faculty meeting, with your students in the classroom, they're coming in and their lives are filled with emotions and events. And we don't know what's really going on with them. So now, one of the reasons that I believe many of us say we're fine or okay is in your fields, and I appreciate when you entered your field of study, of research, what you teach. I don't teach any of the things you have. And in your fields, you have very specific technical language. Like with a few words, you can communicate a lot of meaning to somebody in your field. So sometimes we say we're okay or fine because we don't have the vocabulary. So again, those of you who are willing, and if you did give me an answer about fine or okay, think about this. Think about all, just go back one moment. Think about all the things that are going on in your life. If you were to answer the how are you question more complete, how might you feel? So those of you who are willing, if you can go into chat, now think about it. How are you really? To keep your comments confidential, you can also just do a direct message. Just send that chat just to me, whatever you're comfortable doing. So I want to pause here in a moment, have you reflect on that, and whatever you're willing to share. And meanwhile, answer, there is a wonderful question. How can we know how people feel if they, kind of disguise it? And it's extremely difficult. It requires high levels of skill. It requires asking people as well and establishing a relationship where they feel open and honest to share with you. It's extremely, extremely difficult. Also, you notice there's a comment here, like, is there a problem with the way we ask the question? And that's something I want to get to a little bit later. And I believe it is in part that calm and thoughtful, optimistic. So someone said, I'm feeling okay, but I'm exhausted. Interesting. Inspired. And someone else just to me said, mix of feelings. Someone else entered information that they're not okay. Okay, meaning in that more green or even yellow quadrant. So, thank you for your openness. Thank you for your honesty. But there's a really broad range of feelings here today. Just for transparency for me to participate. Yeah, I'm fairly anxious. I really enjoy doing this work, but I am anxious, not overwhelmed yet, because I find these sessions enjoyable. I believe they're helpful. But I can't see you. I don't know, if how the material is being received. I want it to be enormously helpful, and I don't want to waste your time. So I would have said anxious, but also I'm very excited to be here, extremely excited to be here. And, I will add honored. It's not on, these are not all the words that describe how we feel, but, honored to be asked to be speaking with you. So, and there's someone who just, said, both optimistic, but also overwhelmed, mixed emotions. So this is very, very, very different than the okay or fine, or even, feeling a little stressed. It's much more specific. We now have a lot of data about all of you and those of you who participated. I think sometimes we don't want to know how people feel because now what do we do with this, right? With this group of people, what do I do with this data, with this information? We'll get to that in a moment. So remember, this is the first ability of 4. So the second is, why do we ask? Why bother asking? And there are 2 reasons for it. Somebody mentioned in chat earlier about empathy and connecting with people. So if this were a one-on-one and someone said, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Well, for me to have that empathic connection with you, if I can mirror that to some extent, you will feel heard, you will feel acknowledged. With a group this size, I don't know, it probably is nearly impossible to do that. But the first reason to ask, how are you, and get an honest answer is to make that emotional connection. We call it emotional empathy. Again, many of you might say or think, if I did this in my classroom, I'd be overwhelmed. The emotional labor component is overwhelming. Or that's not my job. It's not that I don't care, but I don't have the time. So the other reason to ask, how are you? It's that we want to match the task and the emotions. In this line of research is interesting and fun to do, also quite easy. And here's how it works. You bring people into your laboratory and you induce a mood. That might mean, for example, have someone read a sad story or watch a sad movie or a happy one. And then you give them a task to do. Let's say here is a complex spreadsheet. I'd like you to go through the spreadsheet and find all the errors in formulas. Happy people, sad people. People who watch the sad movie are more likely to find errors in that spreadsheet. Now, if the task were, I'd like you to come up with as many ideas as possible for an article, people who are happy will generate more interesting ideas. Each of these quadrants on our map, our emotion or mood map, has a purpose. Anxiety, for instance, is probably right now, I think, helpful for me, as long as it doesn't get, I'm not too anxious, because it keeps me focused. I'm monitoring the time, I'm monitoring chat. Is this working? So there is a time and a place for all emotions. And this ability to figure out this part of my lecture, and we'll get to this later, how can I facilitate learning? What quadrant of these 4 quadrants would best facilitate this part of the curriculum? What quadrant would most facilitate a conversation with a family member about some difficult topic? So we have, how are you? First skill. Second, why do we ask? Does it matter? What's its impact? Here's the third. Even just during our 1 hour together, your feelings may change. You may get an email coming in, which changes how you feel. You may have started interested in this, but then your attention might wander. So how will your feelings change even during this 1 hour that we have together? And why? This ability to predict the future, psychologists call it affective forecasting. Affect meaning feeling or emotion. How do you forecast changes? You start a lecture with your students, you're walking in, good morning, with a lot of energy, but you realize later you're getting to get to some very difficult content. How might their emotions change during the course of your lecture? And then finally, the fourth skill or ability is, how will you, during the time of this lecture, maximize your engagement? For you to get the most out of our time together, I think being in more of a pleasant feeling will help you. So I'm going to work as hard as I can to engage all of you, but you need to do it as well. You need to engage in active strategies to stay focused, just as your students do in every single class that you teach, just if you're in a department meeting, just as if you're chairing that meeting, just as every single faculty member must do in that meeting. This is no different than what we do each and every day. So 4 skills. So that's the model. We're going to go into this in some more detail, but I want to mention a few things. Where this came from, what the theory was. We can also measure emotional intelligence if it is a set of hard skills. If it is an intelligence, we have data to support that. You can measure it objectively. Here is the interesting and one of the other difficult things. It's not our research, but other researchers have found that when people take our assessment, people typically overestimate their level of emotional intelligence. And the question is, what's the danger or the problem if you or someone overestimates their level of emotional intelligence? I want to pause there. And if anyone has a suggestion, again, in chat, seems to be working pretty well. I appreciate that. What do you think is the danger or the problem if someone overestimates their level of emotional intelligence?
You mean their own emotional intelligence or his colleagues' emotional intelligence?
Let's say your own. Thank you again for that clarification. And someone just did a direct message. Overconfidence, absolutely. And the problem is, yes, yeah. Thinking, misunderstanding people, yeah, yep. A lot of misunderstanding. What else? What else is the problem? If I think I'm really great at this, and I'm not as good as I think. Protect your own self, just truths. Yeah. Oh, interesting. To manipulate them and good smart on you. Yep. Mistakes, damaged career. Yep. Yeah. It's problematic at the very least. I think you probably would say. I might think in this lecture, oh, this is going quite well. Or I might think I made a little joke before and people started to laugh. They thought my joke was very funny, but I misread that. And in fact, they were quite insulted or they're laughing at me. So yeah, miscommunication, big time, really big time. You will not achieve your objectives. And absolutely. So whereas I thought I did, I thought the path that I took, my emotion management strategies were really effective, but it wasn't. It was really a horrendously badly run meeting or interaction, or a terribly written email that did not communicate what I wanted. So this is a problem, and I guess I want to keep everyone engaged, but do think about this, which is, what if I'm not as good as I think about this? And I think it's enormously helpful to think about that. It's very, to me, it's also helpful. I do this a lot. Just to remind myself, doing these things sounds very simple. It's very difficult to do this in real time. So thank you for that. Oh, and by the way, there are ways we measure it. So how do you measure something like this? This is not a real item, but you would have someone expressing an emotion and you would ask what the right or wrong answer is. And there's 141 of these kinds of questions. If you're, by the way, if you're sending a chat to me directly, I don't want to distract myself and others. I won't respond to that in chat for just now. But again, some people remember when I asked, what's the danger of being overconfident in emotional intelligence? It is related to other intelligences, but the correlation is about 0.4. So in other words, you can score really high on a standard intelligence test and a little bit lower on ours. So there are ways to actually validate your self-view other than with assessment. Oh, okay. So context is important. One of those things that these popular press got wrong or didn't care about is they say emotional intelligence is really super important. IQ, intellectual ability, doesn't matter. Now, you could, in fact, there are, published studies out there which would suggest that intelligence, traditionally defined and measured, actually doesn't predict well in your environment. So how smart you are versus your colleagues in your department to predict success in your field or effectiveness, however you might define it, correlation is really low. And why is that? The reason is your university hires faculty and staff who already have these qualities. In order to teach in your field, you need a college degree. In order to get into college or university, you have to pass tests. So this is called restriction of range. In your field, at your university, intelligence may not matter a whole lot because you're already above a minimum level. So it doesn't matter anymore. So now, it also says to teach what you all teach requires incredibly high levels of technical expertise. And I share this slide because I don't want you to think I'm going to come in here and say, all that stuff that you did to get here, that doesn't matter. It does. Working very hard, acquiring high levels of technical knowledge and expertise are essential for what you all do. But now, ability-based emotional intelligence does have other benefits, and that's why we're here today. Because we know that people who are higher, as we measure it, in ability-based emotional intelligence are more pro-social. They're just more helpful. They have better well-being. They create a more positive environment. These are the people you want to work with. These are the teachers that you want. The last one is in green as a reminder to me. It was a really interesting study. It was out of Australia, where managers who were higher in emotional intelligence did accomplish their tasks, the what of performance, a little bit better. But it's how they did it. They mentored, they communicated, they acted with integrity. So some people might think, well, if I did all this stuff, I would just be a nice person, but I wouldn't actually accomplish anything. That is not true. At least according to this study. So this is why we're here today. I believe these skills can be enormously helpful in all of our relationships, both on campus and off. So let's try a few of these things. We have an hour to go over the theory, try to give you some background for where this came from. But now let's look at maybe applying some of these skills and seeing how that might work in your daily lives. But before we do that, as I said, look, I do a lot of these sessions and I try to make them interesting and helpful. Several years ago, I was working with a group of chemical engineers. And someone said, I appreciate having sessions like these, teaching me these skills. But then I go back into an environment where my boss is just terrible, or the culture of our institution or our company is really toxic. And he shared with me this hierarchy of controls, which depending on your field, you may be very, very familiar with. At the bottom level, we give you personal protective equipment. And then we send you back into that toxic environment. The most effective strategy is to eliminate the hazard at the top level. So although I do believe that these sessions are helpful, a lot more is required to have an institution, to have an organization that is really a culture of, that is, first of all, that is not toxic, but it's also a culture that you would want to be part of. And that requires leadership and the entire culture to be built around principles of respect and emotional intelligence and things like that. So I do want to acknowledge that sometimes it does seem we're teaching skills and we're just giving you a mask or giving you, having you don this personal protective equipment and then sending you back. Just to acknowledge that. So let's look at a few ways to apply some of these skills. Someone mentioned earlier about the reason that when we ask how are you, we get okay or fine. It's how we ask. And I believe I commented and said, yeah, I think that is exactly what's going on. There are many times where someone asks me, hey, David, how you doing? And I just smile or nod my head, or I just say, hi. I don't even answer the question. And they don't realize it, right? So, because it's not really a question. And I think a lot of this, as one of you said earlier, it's about the tone. Hey, how you doing? How? Hello, how are you? If you have the time, and if you have the environment to actually ask the question, think about the tone that you use. Now, it has to fit your style. You might also want to share how you're doing to say, oh, wow, this is actually a real question. Others will say, as you did in chat earlier, I thought these were great suggestions. How was your day? How was your last class? I believe you said you're a little bit worried about it. How's that going? How was the faculty meeting? How did it go? And again, in a tone that invites openness. So I don't know you. I don't know your environment. Could you go into chat and indicate, again, tone is very difficult to write about. Could any of you indicate how do you ask this kind of question? Yeah, and so look at chat. Yeah, we don't want an answer. Absolutely, I think that's part of the problem. So what could you do to ask this question? And by the way, one of the things I'll ask you all to do is at the end of this session in the next few days to reflect on it and actually experiment with your colleagues. So how could you ask this question in your environment? And I'll wait for another answer or two. How could you do it? Yeah, smiling, eye contact. That really helps if you're just running down the hallway. Yeah. Oh, yeah. How's your workload going this semester? Don't, yeah, great. Enthusiastic tone. So one thing I'll say about this, so let's say if I am feeling incredibly sad, if something terrible happened to me, which it has not today, and I ask, how are you? If I'm feeling excited, it may not invite that tone. If I'm feeling incredibly excited and say, hey, how are you doing? I am not always creating an open environment where someone who is maybe overwhelmed would be willing to share. So this is why this is this is quite difficult. It's a simple question, but it's so hard to do it well. So that's the first thing. So I'm going to give you a couple of these kinds of things to think about. And I do hope one of these will resonate with you and that you're able to try some of these. All right, emotions facilitate thinking. I don't know what you all do, although I know a little bit more because earlier when you introduced yourself. So let's say you're about to meet with a student about their grades and the student is not happy with it. What would that ideal emotion or emotions be? And it might be a little lower energy, but high on pleasantness. Why? It allows you to process and listen, show a little empathy, and maybe have that student be more reflective as well, as opposed to a student who is angry or anxious. You're teaching a very difficult class. How do you ensure content coverage? Well, lower energy, low pleasantness is that lower left quadrant. You need students to focus on this content. But how do you want to end that lecture? Well, you might want to generate enthusiasm and so forth and so on. So one of the things to think about is how do you create an optimal environment for learning or for a conversation? This applies in the classroom and out of the classroom as well. How do you maximize learning and engagement? So again, for me today, how do I try to maximize engagement? What emotions or emotion will facilitate that? Now, I do want to mention something in the bottom of the slide here, which is extremely important. This does not give us the okay to say, well, it's okay for me to be angry in the classroom. Strategically, we should strive to create very pleasant, engaging classroom and office environments. In the long run, that's the kind of environment that you want to create. But tactically, sometimes anxiety can be helpful, but not all the time. Let me come back here. Let me think about this for a moment. Could you all think about, what's today, Wednesday? Think about what's on your calendar in your diary for whether later today or tomorrow. Can you indicate what the activity is, or what the ideal emotion or emotions might be to facilitate that activity? In other words, can any of you apply this slide to something that's going on currently in your life? So it can be a difficult question, but think about that for a moment. And we've had some good luck with chat. Can you give us an idea of an activity that you have in the very near future, and which emotion or emotions could facilitate it? I'll give you a little bit more time. I know it's a difficult question, but it'd be really helpful. And again, you can direct message me if you're, yeah. So the question is, looking at this slide, what do you have coming up in the next few days? What activity or meeting or lecture or conversation or email do you have to engage with in the near future? And which emotions would facilitate or help you with that task? So I've given you some examples here, but do any of these apply to you? Okay. For instance, exactly. There's a quiz tomorrow, so I need to be focusing on some details. Oh, interesting. I have a meeting with my mentors. So some interest, low energy to reflect focus. Exactly. So thank you. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. So I just got a direct message. I won't repeat that just for confidentiality, but that is exactly, I think that would be helpful. Upcoming class self-reflection. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, these are really multiple tasks, high energy, low. Okay, great. So again, another direct message. I won't repeat that, but it's really about high energy, low pleasantness, because I need a little anxiety to focus. Attention. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and I'm just reading some of these other comments. Yeah. Yeah. And again, you have people from multiple cultures, but the emotional environment does matter. It does impact us, whether we're aware of it or not. So thank you for that. So it looks like this did get across, and this idea of I'm going to give this lecture anyway, or have this meeting. How can we maximize the learning or engagement? Something else, I'm just going to share a few more of these ideas. Emotions have universal causes. We're frustrated because there's an obstacle to getting something that we value. But what you value, I may not. What you value, I may not. And here's just a couple of examples of how a basic emotion can have different causes for different people. And I won't get into detail here. When we do our more in-depth training workshops, we actually have people fill out charts like this on, let's say you were chair of the department. Could you fill this out on all of your faculty. If you're a manager in an office, can you fill this out on your staff? If I am working for you, can I fill this out on you? I'll give you a quick example. I have had a colleague of many years at Yale, and he would get incredibly upset, not quite angry, but close to it, if people were late for meetings. And so when we would hire staff to work in his department, I would orient them and say, if you have a 9 a.m. meeting, get there at 8:59 or 9 o'clock, not 9:01. That's important to him. And some people would say, but who cares? You know, if you're a few minutes late, life is complicated, but this individual cares. So knowing this about someone, this specific cause, is a really great way to enhance a relationship. Now, remember, we have 4 skills, 4 hard skills, and the 4th one is emotion management. So many of us have been trained or taught or raised in families to check emotions at the door. After all, given what I teach or I work at a university, it's important not to be emotional, which is not the same. And so I should not show how I feel. I should suppress my emotions. And there are times where suppression is actually, it's okay. And in fact, would make sense. However, this is a highly stylized graph from the work of James Gross at Stanford University. And in his work, he finds that the more you suppress your emotions, the less cognitive resources you have to process what's going on. So let's say you're in a meeting, one of your colleagues says something and you think, oh, that's ridiculous. Or, you know, you just think that's just a dumb thing to say or whatever it is. Now, you probably don't say that. You may just put on a fake smile and nod your head. But you're thinking, that is, why did he ever say it that way? What happens at the end of the meeting is there's a bit of a blank there, right? You just, you lost some information. And so if that doesn't work, what does? And again, look, there are times to suppress. It would be inappropriate, culturally inappropriate for me to share everything that I'm thinking or feeling. It's inappropriate, and I understand that. So I'm not saying you should never do this, but I do want to make the point that it comes at a cost, a cognitive cost. All right, so what does work? So over the long run, there are strategies that help reduce our emotional set point. And I imagine there are probably some chemical engineers who could come up with a really good analogy to this. You know, how do you lower the boil? Right? In your case, probably maybe increase the boiling point. But how do you decrease, you know, your set point? Meaning, more and more stress has to set you off, as opposed to you know, these little events. Yeah. So I'm going to pause here and just take a moment. Yeah, emotions and behavior are culturally based. Absolutely, 100%. And yeah, and so what works for me would be incredibly inappropriate in another culture. In terms of specific behaviors, in terms of what I say and how I say it. The expression of emotion is extremely cultural. And by the way, when we say culture, and I appreciate that question, I should have addressed it earlier. Culture is not just the United States and Saudi Arabia. It's your university. It's your department within that university. Each organization has its own culture. And so it's, how do I communicate this is very specific to the person and to the culture. But we'll go back here. But emotions are universal. In fact, I apologize for doing this because, you know, when people go through their slides very quickly, but you were all able to pick this up. Emotions are universal, not just across culture, but across species. So we can sit here, I can sit here in my home office in the East Coast of the United States and talk to you in Saudi Arabia. And these concepts apply everywhere. What does not work, I'll just quickly scoot here. What does not work are specific behaviors or specific ways of asking, how are you? Which is why I'm asking you how you could do it in your environment. Also, what is acceptable for me to express here would be incredibly unacceptable, perhaps, to you. So thank you for that question. And I should have addressed that earlier. But emotions are universal. So the last set of skills to think about are, how can you engage in strategies? Now, these take a lot of time. A lot of people say, I'm way too busy to do these kinds of things. But there are strategies that you can use on a daily basis. Think about your next meeting or tomorrow. Think about your calendar. What could go wrong? Modify the situation. When and where do you meet? When do we have this kind of session? What time of day works best? Intervening moment. Pause before responding. Draft, but don't send the email. The second to last one says match and validate. This comes from something called dialectical behavior therapy. A student, a colleague, a family member expresses a view. You disagree with their view. I'm so angry because, I'm really sad because, and you're thinking, don't be sad, don't be angry. Validate it. I can see how someone might feel that way. Because they do feel that way. You're not agreeing with it. But emotion validation can be enormously, enormously helpful. And so in an ideal world, you would do all this in real time. How am I feeling? What about my students or faculty? Am I matching those to connect and getting the work done? Where is this coming from? How might the feelings change? And what will I do in real time to achieve an ideal outcome? So the challenge that we have in doing all this is, certainly this is a challenge for me. I have yet to meet someone who exhibits these skills in real time at a high level of expertise, high level of skill, under stressful conditions and on a consistent basis. And what I hope in the hour that we spent together, my hope is that you begin to think about not what you're going to do, but how you do things. So this should not add to your to-do list or stress. If you can think about in labs and emails and advising, in your meetings, in your writing, in your interactions with each other, is there anything that you can do differently? How you do it, how you engage with people, how you set the right tone. That would be my hope. So I want to thank you very much. Those are my contact details. Should you have any questions or feedback, if you disagree with me, some of you have some really, really good questions. Would appreciate hearing from you. This is how I learn, by your questions and by your comments. And I just want to thank you very much for your time and attention. I know you all have a lot to do today, and I really do appreciate the fact that you've joined me today. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. If we can have just one or two questions.
I'm just laughing about procrastination. Procrastination is one of those emotion, those strategies that don't work. And a lot of times it is related to anxiety or feeling of overwhelmed, being overwhelmed. Where do I start? So it's a great question. And in fact, it's one of those, a lot of us engage in that. I do all the time, but it's sometimes generated from just feeling overwhelmed.
Yes, by this, I think, thank you very much, Dr. David. Thank you for all the participants in this event, and have a nice day off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.